Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here today. While we are waiting a few people still to connect, I wanted to welcome you to this webinar. The title of the webinar, as you may know, is Generative AI in Action, Experimentation, Adoption, and Governance. It is the first webinar of a webinar series we are conducting as a joint research center of the European Commission. By the way, I'm Luca Tangi and I work for the research center of the European Commission. And we have been organizing this webinar series together with our colleagues in DG Digit and in the context of the observatory that is called Public Sector Tech Watch. For the ones who don't know, it is our observatory, our initiative, where we do study the adoption of emerging technologies in the public sector in Europe. So you're all very welcome to this first webinar of the series. And today we are going to discuss a bit the use of generative AI in the public sector that we all know is a quite compelling topic at this moment. Many administrations are like trying to understanding a bit how to make the best use of this technology while being at the same time in a kind of safe and protect position, I would say. So the technology cannot somehow undermine public values that are behind the work of our administrations. So let me start with a few housekeeping rules. So this meeting will be recorded only for internal purposes, so nothing will be displayed or published. And the way participants can interact with me, with the expert, with the panelists later on is via the chat. So we really hope for a very lively chat. So feel free to ask any type of questions to us, to the expert who will present the study, to the panelists, but also feel free to share your thoughts, your ideas, your reflections, like your experience, whatever. I think the chat can be a very nice place where we can also make this webinar a bit lively and also have the opportunity everyone to express yourself. So keep the use of the chat, and we are gonna check all the questions. We are gonna try to answer to all of them, or if not most of them. And we will also have the opportunity later on to take your question and ask your question directly to the panelists. So if you go to the next slide, we can see a bit the agenda of the day. So as you know, the webinar is on generative AI, and is also an opportunity for us to present one of the latest study we've been publishing on this topic, but also is the opportunity for us to discuss this topic and the content of the study with our distinguished panelists. So there will be an introduction that a bit set the boundaries and the context of the study, done by my colleague Paula. Then we will present our study. The study has been conducted with our two external experts, Ronnie Medaglia and Patrick Mikalev, and it will be them presenting the main findings of the study. And then we are going to have a lively discussion starting from the results of the study with our three panelists, Martin from the city of Copenhagen, Ivana from the AI office of the European Commission, and Ilya from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperations. And then we just wrap up and invite you to join then the next webinar. So I think with that, I can close this very short introduction. Again, thank you all for joining. I hope everything works well. I read some message on the sound, but I hope everyone can hear us very well. Again, feel free to interact via the chat. Now, if you go to the next slide, I'm happy to give the floor to my colleague Paola, that is here with us today, and she will introduce a bit the study and why we have decided to go for a research specifically on this topic. So thank you, Paola, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luca, and welcome all. Thank you for joining us today. So before we get into the specifics, let's quickly set a bit the scene on the EU's policy framework on AI today. So if we go to the next slide, you will see maybe one of the main three pillars of the EU policy framework on AI. So we have the AI Act as a regulatory cornerstone. We have the Continent Action Plan that's focused on strengthening the AI ecosystem and sovereignty. And the Apply strategy focuses on adoption, so how organizations actually integrate AI into their daily operations. And together, this actually reflect what the EU approach always tried to do, is to balance this excellence and trust in this process. So we look actually at this evolution more deeply in a GRC brief developed together with DG Connect, tracing the EU's path through these phases: exploration, transition, and now maturation of the policymaking of AI. So we have a link there we can share with you later on what this brief is about, but at least to show you a bit what we are looking at as a background in this report. So if we go to the next slide, you will see actually that we are zooming in the Apply AI strategy specifically. Because this piece actually speaks directly to us as public administration. So the public sector here is not a bystander, but actually is explicit mention as one of the strategic sectors to adopt AI. And it is public administrations are essentially asked to do two things. First, to treat AI as a strategic asset, so not as an isolated tool. And here we're thinking about integrating into how institutions actually work and deliver services. And on the other hand, also to drive demand. So through our own procurement for European, mostly open source AI solutions, the ask is to try to help the European AI market to strengthen the AI sovereignty. And that's actually a big ask for public administration, because we're not talking only about responsibility on assimilating trustworthy AI and Gen AI internally, but also about actively supporting the competitive AI market here in Europe. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see where we started and where we are now. And this is actually not new territory for us. So back in 2024, we have published the first brief on the potential of AI for the public sector. And already there, our survey showed that 30% of public managers were using certain like Gen AI tools, like for instance, ChatGPT, with another 44% planning to. And also fast forward to today, under the Public Sector Tech Watch, which is the observatory where you can actually find different emerging techs in the public sector, we have now more than 200 documented GA cases for public administrations across Europe. So we actually see this growing fast, not only in the use implementation, but also experimentation with these tools. So actually, the logical step for us, of course, is to go deeper and understand what's happening on the ground. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to see actually the report that we have just published, and you can download through the QR code here. And this report is work that has been happening in the past 12 months, where we investigated in depth actually the adoption of generative AI in new public administrations, were focused not only on individual behaviors, but also on organizational approaches. So as I say here, you can just go through the QR code, but also my colleagues are going to share the links in the chat for you. So the reports, I'm going to walk you through the structure very briefly before we actually invite Ronnie and Patrick to tell us a bit more about the findings. So if we go to the next slide, you are going to see here a bit of the structure of the report. So we took a dual angle. On the one side, we explore how individuals use GenAI. And in this, we focus on how people might differ in skills, attitudes, or actually comfort with the technology. So the same systems and that's being used very differently depending on who is behind the keyword, let's say. And on the other side, we focus on how administrations approach assimilation. So the strategies that they put in place to make these tools safely available, both to their staff, but also to external users. And this was built through a database of 31 interviews across different case studies, different administrations across Europe, and these interviews were the basis for most of this work. So I think now I take also the time to thank you, all the interviewers that were part of the study, and some of them are here with us today on the panel to discuss the results of the report and implications also in their experience. So before anything else, I'm handing over now, if we go to the next slide, please, to actually the discussion of the findings of the report. So we have Ronnie Medaglia from the Copenhagen Business School that is going to start with the discussion of this work. So Ronnie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paola, and thank you, Luca, for the introduction. My name is Ronnie Medaglia. I'm a professor at the Copenhagen Business School, and together with Patrick, we worked on the empirical parts of this report where we try to understand not just the state of the art of Gen AI adoption in the public sector in Europe, but also some of its key characteristics, the drivers, some of the challenges, and also try to make sense of the development in light of try to understand the future trajectory of potentials for Gen AI in the public sector in Europe. So next slide. Here I want to show you that the part I will tell you briefly about now is the first part of the findings that we have, which focuses on individual perceptions by civil servants using Gen AI. And the idea, as Paola was saying before, is that these individual perceptions sort of are worth investigating because they form the basis on which then organizations can create readiness to embrace the uses of generative AI that is already occurring at the individual level. And at the same time, they are affected, the organizational assimilation is going to be affected by the input that individuals have. The uniqueness of generative AI, which we focus on in this report, is exactly the fact that it's a general purpose technology that lends itself to a lot of individualized, personalized uses that are worth mapping given the rapid diffusion that was mentioned before at European level. So what's the lens that we adopted to try to capture individual perceptions and uses by civil servants of generative AI in the public sector? In the next slide, we show that we adopted a three-dimensional view drawing on the theory of technological frames of reference, which distinguishes between three dimensions. The first one is the perception of the nature of technology. So how employees perceive the technology capabilities, but also the technology limitations. The second dimension is how employees understand why their organization is adopting the technology. What is the rationale and what is the intended value and purpose of the organization in which they operate according to their own personal perception, understanding, and experience. The third dimension is about the interpretation by individual employees of the practical application of the technology, including the conditions in which this is useful, also obstacles, but also expected consequences of a daily use of the technology. So we found a wide array of findings that are detailed in the report, starting from the nature of technology, which is shown in the next slide. We see a key tension here for each of the three dimensions. Interestingly, when we talk about the perceived nature of technology, there's a tension between, on the one hand, generative AI perceived as a technology that, in essence, provide potential empowerment to individual civil servants in Europe as a cognitive partner that can augment human intelligence and that can augment civil servant capabilities. In the words of one of our interviewee, a project manager, was saying that generative AI, for instance, can very well read the description of user reviews, and it can find something that can potentially imply some non-compliance factors. So a very effective use, for instance, for compliance checks. On the other hand, the other side of this tension is instead technology perceived as, in essence, potentially creating dependency, so disempowering. Generative AI can potentially undermine cognitive autonomy and even intellectual integrity. Some of the interviewees were saying, I'm becoming very dependent on it, I'm aware of it, and this is more than I would like to admit. So we can see that there are key dilemmas, key tensions already in the perception of the technology in its essence. But if we look at the next slide, when we look into the technology strategy, we see another related tension that emerged. On the one hand, when we ask interviewees about why do they think their organization is encouraging the adoption of generative AI, they understand that generative AI is a driver of increasing efficiency, providing organizational innovation, even decision-making. One of the policy officers that we interviewed explicitly said that the idea is to improve decision-making, policy-making in the public sector. On the other hand, however, there are struggles in the perception of the adoption of generative AI strategically in the organization, as weakening traditional mechanisms for behavioral oversight. This technology is perceived as to be proteic, fluid. So as a result, for instance, in one of the interviewees' words, it's very difficult to define data protection measures. And because in principle, any data that users can access could be processed. So there's a dilemma here between innovation push and the need for control that emerges in this technology strategy. In the last dimension, in the next slide, we look and ask about experiences of technology in use. Here, the dilemma is, on the one side, generative AI used for exploration across a range of tasks. So for instance, one of the interviewees tell us about using generative AI as an engine for producing new ideas. And this is really something that we see across the different cases that we have analyzed, where the technology in use is perceived as a tool for exploration. On the other hand, however, there's a lot of risk aversion and there's a lot of uncertainty around appropriate use, including the so-called shadow use of generative AI. What's the boundary between using the organizational sanctioned version of generative AI and personal tools for which individual civil servants might have their own subscription? So one of the interviewees, for instance, tell us that they suspect that there is a gray area of use that is very significant and for which managers are not completely aware. So there is a tension here between the potential for exploration and the need for regulation. Now, these three dimensions open up the need to not just recognize these tensions that are emerging, but also to be able to govern them and see what is their impact at the organizational level. And that's what we've done in the second part of our report, for which my colleague and co-author Patrick will talk about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie, and thank you very much, Luca and Paola, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick McAuliffe. I'm a professor in the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And as Ronnie already mentioned, the second part of the report moved the frame from the individual perceptions to the organizational ones. And as explained, these are not something that we simply see as isolated dimensions, but they're intricately tied together. So the second part of the report looked at specifically this. We wanted to see exactly what public organizations are doing at the organizational level with Gen AI, how they're experiencing the adoption of it, how they're assimilating it into operations, and what is the process of that happening in practice. So if we move on to the next slide. What we have here, and this was a little bit of a process that we did when we were engaging with the data, is that we were simultaneously looking at the literature that existed over the years in terms of technology adoption and assimilation. And this is just an illustrative figure of an article published some years ago where they look at technology, IT innovation adoption. So how do organizations adopt and assimilate new technologies in their operations? And what's quite striking here is that we see when we look at from the left side to the right, there's a very long process of initiation where one organization becomes aware of the technology, there's an attitude formation, there's a proposal for adoption, then there's some decisions made about whether to adopt or not, there's an allocation of resources, and finally then there's acquisition of adoption of the innovation, after which users are expected to adopt and use this technology in a productive manner. What's strikingly different if we go on to the next slide, and when we looked at our data and when we see what's happening in the case of Gen AI, is that Gen AI follows a very different trajectory to this traditional process of assimilation and adoption of technology. What we actually see here is that a lot of the phase of forming attitudes, trying to understand the impressions of technology, trying to understand what exactly it does, balancing the cost or the inherent cost of investing in this technology, and then trying to weigh if it actually fits the purpose, are collapsed together. So what we see is that generative AI enters public organizations in a very different way. That happens through several different mechanisms. Already Ronnie talked about a few. One of them is, for example, in many cases, a lot of employees are using a standard piece of software and suddenly there's an update and then you have a Gen AI add-on or component to that. Other ways are through web use or shadow use. So a lot of public administration employees are using it on the side or have kind of shadow IT use, or then there's an individual or flexible licensing. So that means that the previous phase that we used to see where there's a heavy decisional process behind whether to adopt or not the technology is collapsed. Technology is adopted in a way or is used quite quickly, quite rapidly. And that puts an emphasis then on what individuals and organizations actually do with the technology. So if we move on to the next slide, what we did instead is instead of looking at the adoption patterns, what we found in the data is that organizations actually utilize technology and try to create value in different ways. So instead of looking at adoption patterns, whether individuals were using or weren't using generative AI, what we see, and this is quite illustrative in the data that we had in the cases, is that it moves through a value stage. And we have identified 4 distinct types of value. So the first one is explorative value. This is where individuals and teams experiment with simple tasks, simply just to understand what Gen AI capabilities are, what are the limitations, and what are the risks. At the second level, we have a point where administration formalizes access through approved tools. We have governance, training, clear usage guidelines. So here things start to move a little bit more from the experimentation to the more formalized and applied use of Gen AI. At the third level, which we term transformational, here Gen AI becomes embedded in workflows. It starts changing how employees perform complex tasks and how services are designed and delivered. So here's actually where we're starting to see what we would call digital transformation, where the technology is transforming the organization. And in the last stage, in the reflective, we start seeing that insights from AI-enabled activities are systematically used to improve governance capabilities, policies, and services. And there's a couple of important points that I need to note here is that when we see these cases, on the one hand, this doesn't mean that the entire organization moves through this value chain. What we see is that different departments and different units in public organizations could be in very different stages, depending on how much they have invested, how much focus they have on Gen AI. The second one is that we don't really assume that value should increase from an exploratory stage to reflective. But rather what's important here is that each and every unit, each and every task, each and every case where generative AI is used should try to position itself uniquely. So some cases would need operational value, whereas others would need transformational. So we are not advocating really that the value should increase and should reach a level of reflective value. And interestingly, what we see here is that some things change as we move up these value chains. So the structure starts becoming from ad hoc to more formalized, and we'll see this in the slides later. The use becomes less shadow use, more formalized use, more approved Gen AI tools, and more processes and compliance practices around it. The tools also that are used are moving from commercial tools and readily available tools that each and every one of us potentially uses to more corporate or in-house developments. And more importantly, the tasks that Gen AI is used start to move up the value chain from simple, very structured tasks to more complex tasks. So if we can move on to the next slide. Okay. What we see here when we look in a bit more detail in each of the stage. So at stage one, what we have tried to develop is a description of each of the stages, as well as what is the main value, and more importantly, what are the tensions or what are kind of like the important decisions that public organizations need to make in each of these stages. At the first stage, what we see is that the principal value is more about learning what Gen AI can do, and tangible productivity gains may occur, but they are usually secondary, and the main point is experimentation. So there isn't really much value in the first stage of our model. In this stage, what we see is that the applications of Gen AI are more appropriate for low stakes, reversible, and non-sensitive work. And the main tensions that are emerging is that administrations must balance the momentum between generated by top-bottom experimentation with legal, ethical, and data protection uncertainty. So this is a point of contention for a lot of organizations. They usually struggle quite a bit to understand where's the fine line between the two. In the second stage of operational, experimentation is converted into more formal, repeatable, and governed use. The main value here is that we have faster and more consistent execution of established activities rather than fundamental process redesign. So basically here we see efficiency gains. The tensions that are identified here is that there's more formal tools that can improve the speed and consistency of routine work. But there is also a need for human verification, and that may reduce the expected efficiency gains. So we have humans that need to check and verify and validate findings. Above this also, the administrations must also move beyond isolated tool optimization and department silos towards more coordinated organizational-wide adoption. So the real challenge here is how do we move this from individual operational efficiency, improving the efficiency of individual workers, to entire departments or entire processes. If we move on to the next slide, we see the next two stages. So in the third stage, Gen AI ceases to be merely a faster way of performing existing tasks. What we find in the data is that it becomes more integrated into core workflows and enables new combinations of human judgment, organizational data, and machine-generated analysis. So in this stage, the cases that are more relevant are knowledge-intensive and mission-critical operations, where there's a high reliance on identifying complex insights or generating more in-depth knowledge into operations. The tensions that arise here is that embedding GenAI in complex workflows seems to create stronger human-AI collaboration. But at the same time, also mentioned by Ronnie, is that it increases dependence on the technology and the need for effective oversight. So this is a very important and critical moment of deployment. In addition, the advanced solutions may scale technically faster than employees, and departments and governance structures need to adapt, and that might produce uneven adoption between different departments. In the last stage, and this is a qualitatively different stage of value, we see that value arises when administration learns systematically from AI. So this is kind of like a meta level of value creation. It's a point where organizations can reflect on their entire operation when they're utilizing GenAI. They can generate important insight that both benefits them, but also the broader ecosystem. That feeds then back into policy, services, and governance insight. This stage is particularly relevant at the organizational and government system level. So specifically for activities like strategic planning and policy evaluation, for regulatory horizon scanning, and also about work across agencies or across public administration bodies. What we see here as the core tension is that administrations must maintain a stable, compliant, and accountable systems. But at the same time, the technologies and their capabilities need to continue to develop rapidly. So the key point here is how exactly do we coordinate learning across a wider organization with underlying compliance requirements to restrict experimentation and innovation. So how do we translate this into policy, and how do we make it then in a way that doesn't hinder innovation and further development? If we move on to the next slide. And this is kind of one of the key insights from our study is that we attempted from these findings to try to deduce a number of priority areas for policy recommendations. And specifically, we divided 3 areas. I know we don't have the time right now to go in depth into these, but on a high level, these areas and these themes are focused on infrastructure, governance, and value creation. So, and on the first level, what we are recommending and what we're suggesting from the insights is that public administrations need to develop more secure, interoperable GenAI environments. This means more shared data governance frameworks, more authoritative corpora, and more kind of common and reusable components and infrastructures. This is something that a lot of the respondents talked about that should have been done many years ago, but when it comes to GenAI, this accelerates the need for these kind of common, interoperable, safe, and reusable infrastructures. The second level is that administrations need clear governance structures. They need defined responsibilities and practical procedures for assessing risks, approving use cases, and maintaining human oversight. Many of the cases that we surveyed highlighted this as a very important factor for limiting the value created from GenAI or from slowing down the actual use and value generation from it. So these arrangements should also be supported at the same time from training, from upskilling people, from continuously monitoring and ensuring that GenAI is used in a responsible way, and that there is clear guidelines about how exactly this should be done. One of the things that was noted is that there's a lot of rules, regulations, legislations, laws, but a lot of times these are not really supplemented with appropriate or corresponding guidelines about how to use this in a responsible way, or how exactly they should be used within the context of or the bounds of the legislation that is in place. Finally, the third one is more about where exactly do we position the value of Gen AI and how exactly do we move it towards use cases that address concrete administrative needs. So we propose that there should be prioritization of high-value use cases through piloting within a risk-tiered environment, and also structured experimentation and focus on evaluation and cross-agency knowledge sharing. This is something very important because we see that a lot of the agencies that we've looked into, they operated a lot of times like islands in the sea of many different public organizations that are doing similar things, but there is a lack of this let's say, sharing between the different agencies. This is very important. So very briefly, these were some of our key policy recommendations. And with that, I would like to hand over the floor to Luca.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Patrick. And now it's the time of our discussion with our expert based on the finding of the study, but also based on their experience, direct experience in the field. So we do have three guests with us today. The first one is Martin from the city of Copenhagen, where he's the head of communication and is also an external lecturer at the University of Copenhagen. And Martin works in the intersection of leadership, communication, organizational change, and AI. So he's very much welcome today, and he's also one of the person we interviewed for the study, and one of the use cases we have in the study is indeed the use case of the city of Copenhagen. Then we have Ilya, that is the chief data scientist at the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. He's managing an interdisciplinary team of data scientists to develop AI application infrastructure and AI tool. And again, also BMZ and the German Federal Ministry is one of the cases we have in our report. So thank you for being here, and thank you also for the availability to support us with the study. And last but not least, we also bring the Commission point of view with Ivana. She works at the European Commission DG Connect, specifically the EI office, where she works on policy development and project implementation on AI with a specific focus on the public sector. She also will do some pilots on, support some pilots on Gen AI. She will talk about this in the context of the Apply AI strategy that you have heard at the very beginning. So we see we have a very rich panel of people, people that can bring their experience to the table. Thank also, I see the chat is already quite lively. I invite you to put all your reflections, but also all your questions for our panelists that will be bombarded by your question after being bombarded by my question first. So very happy to continue with this lively conversation for the next almost an hour. So let me start directly. So I think I made the introduction, and we can start already with the question. So of course, the first question is the same for the three of you. Of course, feel free to introduce yourself and also explain us how does your work connect to this topic of the use of Gen AI in public administration. But I also wanted to ask you directly to comment a bit or reflect a bit on the finding of the report that you had the opportunity to read, but also to listen today. So if you have to pick up one insight from the report, which one would you choose? Because I don't know, it resonates with you, with your experience, or it surprised you the most. So which one would you choose? So I start with Martin. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity and congratulations on publishing this report. So very quick words about how I think this relates to my work. I guess I have several roads into this. As you said, I have different roles here. So you could say I have a low road into this in terms of my more practical experience, and a higher road in terms of a more systemic view to this. You could say. comes from my role as an external lecturer at the IT University. But let me take the low role first. So as a communications professional, I think at a very early stage, I think during February 2023, you could say my road into this was that we started on this structured learning program. So very early after really ChatGPT went live, we started on this learning program that lasted through 2023, most of the year. And what I want to say briefly is that the experience we went through this year, we couldn't really look anywhere else for inspiration or to learn because there wasn't really anywhere else to go. But the points you've made during in this report and the stages, which specifically speaks to me, the 4 stages was very, very verbatim. I would almost say what we experienced. So very short version of this. It was almost instantly we had to talk about issues about well-being, about professional identity. So this took center stage right off the bat, I would say. And I want to stress that I speak about these things. I try to speak about these things agnostically in terms of the pros and cons of AI. It was just this complexity that surprised me really as a manager. So I could give you some examples of this. So Luca, please just interrupt me if there's a. I could just speak from now on then. So so for instance, I think one of the things that hit me most was that what we experienced. I think many organizations are still in this situation. It's sort of a backwards implementation process, right? So users, as you also outline in the report, users are very much expected to themselves go out and find use cases and find value. In a context where there's very little, if any, knowledge about how to actually design work around generative AI. So again, I'm not saying this in terms of an antagonistically position. I'm simply just saying that there's not this knowledge around generative AI and how it works in our workflows. Obviously, this technology is also stochastic. It's very opaque. It changes, as you also highlight in the report. So this constant kind of flux, this perturbation of the way we work, so it's very unpredictable, and that I think was the heart of the matter for me as a manager, that this was unpredictable and was fast and was changing, and what I met was this linear approach, this classical project management approach, right? Maybe a bit of agile, but assuming that we actually have time to work and learn and then implement and set goals, and this just didn't work at all. So we actually had to look for another way to work with this, and I think this speaks into your report about how do we actually align things here, because the technology doesn't fit in the mold, you could say, of the existing way we do governance, really, or we do implementation in organizations. So that's where we started the collaboration with the IT University in Copenhagen and developing the method, the framework for working on this reflective practice.
Thank you, Martin, for this. Navigating a bit the unknown. This is a bit what you are playing with now, with these very fast changes of Gen AI. Ilya, please, floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the invitation from my side as well. And maybe as an introduction, the introduction also explains why we're working together closely with the European Union, because we're funded as a part of the Resilience Fund and started that way. And I think that was also one of the necessary things for us to get success, the freedom that funding gave us. But to start with, I'm representing the data labs, one of the data labs of the German ministries, which were part of the German data strategy in 2021. And we have now implemented these data labs in all the ministries, also, of course, here at BMZ. And we quickly switched our focus to AI, because that was the thing then in 2023, I say. Our first app here at BMZ was done 3 years ago. It was a RAG, and since then we've been in the field, probably the first in the federal government. And then we kind of dragged the others with us. And I think one of the reasons why this happened was actually the funding. The funding was there. We were funded externally by the European Union and could decide ourselves where to spend the money. So we did not have to, well, and to some extent, of course, and to the extent that the European Union will refinance that. But so we had the freedom to define our course of action, and did not have to argue with our own budget keepers why we would do these things, which I think was a very kickstart, was a kind of kickstart. So what I found interesting, looking back over the last 3.5 years, it sounds kind of easy almost when you give your stages and recommendations, and that's, as Martin already mentioned, it's much more chaotic from the inside. When we just started with building an application, chat application, because there was nothing there. Now you can actually buy it or use it as a shadow app on your phone. But when we started, there wasn't, so to say, we didn't have a decision. We wanted to produce an application, a chat interface that's available for everyone within the organization quickly, first of all. And looking back, I can also see that the stages make sense, because I used to sort applications that we build with AI in these 4 stages. And you are looking at it, or you are taking a much more abstract perspective here of a value creation. But for me, it's mostly applications. You need a chat interface to begin with, and you start with context enrichment like RAGs, putting your data, your organizational data together with a chat interface. And then you start with the first real AI applications that would not have been possible 3 years ago, that are so that have AI at its heart, so to say, that use AI at every step. And then the 4th stage for me is the using that together with other organizations. That means, and that's where it becomes really interesting. That means data spaces are actually not a thing anymore. It's more AI spaces now, because you need your AIs to communicate with each other and your agents as well. We don't have that yet, unfortunately, but we want to. And maybe to pick up one of the questions on the chat already, or to answer it my way, we try to be actually we try to produce very good AI applications which are compatible, or which are as good as the ones you can buy. We did not force the users to use it. We said we want the frontier models. So that's why we use the cloud hyperscalers, and then you can buy in the frontier models there. But we keep the context separate. We keep it within the organization.
Thank you.
So that works.
That's also good to hear that it works. Yeah, I'm also very happy to hear from both of you that the stage resonates a bit with your practical experience. That's also why we try to make this framework as much experience-based as possible. But now let's move a bit to the Commission a bit view with our colleague Ivana, and her own view on the report and her own experience on the topic. Please, Ivana.
Thank you very much, Luca, for the invitation. And as Martin and Ile, I want to congratulate you for the well done job on this report that is very, very interesting inside. As you said in the beginning, indeed, I work for DigiConnect, and exactly I work for the AI office, but not for the, let's say, aspect related to trust and so to the regulation. I work for a unit dealing with excellence in AI. So what we do is mainly project under the Digital Europe program, and also in the research part under Horizon. And of course, my work today connects directly with your work on generative AI and public administration, because we are working, we are in this phase of transitioning from just policy ambition to deployment of generative AI in the public sector. This is at highest level the ambition of the AI Continent Action Plan. When the AI Continent Action Plan was published, the European Commission shows that we are not just interested in regulating, that is of course very, very important, but we also would like to create in Europe or improve in Europe the condition for the development and deployment of an AI that is competitive and that is also in a way sovereign. Under this big umbrella of the AI Continent Action Plan, then at the end of last year, as you may know, we published the Apply AI strategy that has a sectorial approach and build a sort of roadmap for the adoption of AI in different sectors. Among this sector, there is of course public administration. And public administration are very important for us because they are not just user, but in many cases are also the first interface between citizen and business and digital transformation. So it's very important that public administration use AI in a way that generates trust in citizens. Under this Apply AI strategy, we have different action. I am actually responsible for one of the action. That was a call we launched last year to implement pilots of generative AI use cases in big consortia of public administration from different member states. The EU contribution that we are about to give soon, because the pilot will be launched officially in July, so 21 million euro. The purpose of this pilot is not just having isolated experimentation, but we want to build something that is replicable, something that is that can be scaled also across other regional and national public administration, and also something that is sovereign. Because one of the conditions of this call for the procurement that public administration will launch once the pilot will start is to select a European model on the basis of some security conditions that are in the call. Another initiative that is subsequent to this call is a coordination and support action that has its purpose to ensure the replicability. In a way, this action will not just coordinate the 3 pilots that we select, but will have, let's say, a broader starter kit, and also support with the technical and legal question also in the field of the procurement. So this brings me to your report and to the last 2 recommendations that were presented by Patrick. I believe what resonates most with our work now in the AI office and connect to the pilot is that we are trying to experiment in a controlled environment with these pilots, using all the guardrail and of course be compliant with the AI Act and the GDPR. And then through the CSI, we are going beyond isolated pilots, and we are trying to build the European capacity and a bigger community of public administration using generative AI. So this is in a nutshell.
Thank you, Ivan. I think we will have also time to deep dive a bit more into this work. But let me go back a bit to Martin with a specific question related a bit with maybe his experience at Copenhagen, the city of Copenhagen, or in general. We have been talking about tensions today while discussing the use of Gen AI. And in particular, we have been observing a lot while talking with people that to some extent they want to use Gen AI because it's they want to experiment, you know, because the tools are available. So everyone wants to kind of play with them or experiment. But also administration wants to try to use them to innovate because they see the potential. But on the other hand, there is some people are also afraid of doing it to some extent because there is some control problem or some safety problem that they kind of recognize, or at least this uncertainty in understanding exactly which are the boundaries in terms of uses, both with including like European legislation, but also practical uses or data sharing or this problem that are let's say widely. So how do we play out in the future? And if you have any suggestions also for the people in the room today to how to deal with these tensions.
Right. So predicting the future. So I'm not going to get too bold there, but I definitely, first of all, looking back, that's a bit more safe. I can certainly recognize this this tension, and I think if I'm paraphrasing your report a bit, but you talk about this need to align the individual informal workflows with the organizational assimilation, I think is the word you use, and I see this tension, playing out there very much. And I think that was also where my last opening comment landed, that there is this sort of tension, or this gap between individual use or the kind of technology that this is and the way that we try to implement this in the organization. So I think there's just two perspectives I want on this. The one is the organizational perspective. As I said before, I foresee at least a problem here when organizations try to assume that there's this time and stability to work with this alignment, and that's maybe a point I would want to challenge a bit in your reports in the stages. I would rather illustrate that as sort of a loop that this I realize that's also what you're arguing for, but I think this is so important. This loop goes all the way around, also back to the organization, also the macro level of the organization, you can say. So this alignment isn't simply people on the floor have to align with the organization. It's also the organization having to align with this technology. So the governance and the distribution of authority, you could say, the mandate in the organization, the way we do this, I think, has to change. And I think this is a very long game. And as such, I would be wary to predict where it goes. But I do think it's a very long game. And this tension really highlights that. And the other thing I would say is, I think another way to speak about this is what I would use the socio-technical perspective or terminology is I see this tension as a matter of, because of work design, the way we design our work creates more or less predictable workflows, right? In the one end, we have to do this, obviously, but we can't design it entirely. So you also have, on the opposite side of this, you have this need to do job crafting, to create your work. And this is very much, a huge gap in terms of when you put generative AI into this mix, because, I mean, there's no real design around it. I think generally speaking, it's so new still, and the crafting, the individual, as you also point out to the report, way of using this is almost chaotic, and that's a recipe for a lot of problems, I think, if we don't manage to balance these different perspectives. And the answer for this, I think, is this having this cadence and the stages you also introduce, working with this very much reflectively, adaptively, but not just on a human level. The whole organization needs to adapt and change, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's nice, this dual perspective, of individuals that need to a bit adapt, but also organizations need to adapt to individual use that always is indeed chaotic, but also based on the experience, on the competence of the people. If I'm good in doing something, I may not use GenAI for that. If maybe this is something I'm not very good at, exactly, I may ask for more help to GenAI. So it's more like really different individuals can use it differently, depending on their needs. Ilya, I have a question also for you, but it's interesting that we have prepared this question in advance, but now I'm also reading the chat, and I think most of these questions resonate also with the question from our guests and the people are listening today. So we propose what we call value-based framework. Why we call it value-based framework is because we really want to start from the idea that we need to think which type of value Gen AI can create in organizations. So starting from the value and not from the technology, I think it's an important change of perspective when you think about the use of Gen AI. But still remain a question, at least so far. Where would you say Gen AI has created most value? Because we also read in the chat many people saying, yeah, but how do we create value with Gen AI that is not only like drafting better emails or doing like very small tasks, but I think taking the full potential of the technology. So where we are so far in terms of value created by Gen AI, but also how do you see it changing in the future? And yeah, and also maybe with challenges we may need to face to create more value with Gen AI.
Yeah. As a natural scientist or a data scientist, I'm compelled to say I have no clue what creates value, because I cannot measure value properly. It's very difficult in an organization. There are different dimensions why this is problematic, so the numbers are kind of few and scarce. Maybe to give you a number. Finally, also, of course, it depends on the interface, on the type of interface that you use, the way that you use AI with, at the moment at least. Well, to give you a few numbers, maybe, what creates value, in order to get you through the process, how we try to figure out what creates most value. At the moment, we have about 1,000 people at BMZ working at BMZ. We've just reached the level where there are 1,000 prompts in our application every day, and that took about 1.5 years. And it took some improvements to the product to get there. So that sums up to about 250 million token a month, or 20,000 pages per day of data. There's a lot uploaded. The ratio between upload and download is about 25 to 1. So about 25 as much data is uploaded and analyzed by the AI as the AI answers. So that gives you a few ideas where the value could come from. I would argue that it's mostly large papers or large PDFs being analyzed, and so it's mostly text work at the moment, I would say. What we are starting to see is that people use libraries, and that brings us to the very important factor that creates value, which is context. You need to tailor your system to be specific for your organization, which we did. So our AI would answer for the perspective of BMZ. That means that you should do the following, or something like that. Add things like that, which you will not get from ChatGPT unless you change ChatGPT to become your organizational AI, which means that you will have to add all the context, the specific context, which is, of course, sensitive information. So to wrap that up, I think that moving the specific knowledge, the background information, as long as the data security levels are right, and hyperscalers, we are, of course, limited to certain documents which are not confidential, but there's enough sufficient data there. If you move that context to your AI and then make it, so to say, be aware of the goals of your organizations, you can create a lot of value, also strategic value, actually, for the organization, with improving the quality of answers. And that's what we see. We see that people use it a lot for analyzing documents and, well, improving, of course, improving all text output, maybe doing strategic studies, strategic questions already, small-scale studies. Important factor was also to add internet search. We have a French startup, LinkUp, discovered, which does that. I'd like to make some a little bit of advertisement here, because that's the only one we found in Europe. And since then, the numbers have actually improved greatly. So I would recommend everyone to do that as well. So what can I envision in the future? Of course, I'm really interested to see whether we will reach the point where AIs talk to AIs and discuss things on their own, which you might find questionable with human in the loop and all that. But at some point, this will happen, and if you manage to do the setting right. And I believe that a lot of value can be created there. And then we want to scale up what we do with other organizations, because the system works and can be easily applied to another 5,000 users, something like that. And I believe that, well, people respond that they have about 25% speed improvement, and 50%, more than 50% say that they also have quality improvement when they use AI. That's just a very uncertain measurement of value, but as good as we get, I must say.
Thank you very much indeed. Measuring value is always a big challenge in general. But I think you shared very interesting insights and examples there. Let me move now to Ivana. I think I have $1 million question for you, if you know the answer. But we all know, I think the European Commission published a European Technology Sovereignty Package now. So we have a big push in Europe towards being a bit more sovereign in the way we approach our technology, our innovation, and also it's recognized everywhere that public administration play a big role there. No, so they are big buyers, so they have a potential market, or they have a big influence on the market. But they also are kind of exposed institution, no? Because we actually, as institution, especially, can be, or we are exposed to this sovereignty issue or this dependency from non-European providers, especially in the context of Gen AI, when we all know that the market is still a bit concentrated to non-EU players. So that's a reality we live in, but also that's probably something that the European Commission and Europe is trying to change also with this sovereignty package. So how to translate these political ambitions of being more sovereign into more market reality, no? So into more practical solutions, and how to build this GovTech ecosystem of startups that is European, capable of offering valuable alternatives for our administrations.
Thank you very much, Luca. Indeed, you said it well. It's a 1 million question, because I really believe there is no just one project or one initiative that can translate this sovereignty ambition into reality for public administration. Indeed, the approach of the tech sovereignty package is an ecosystem approach, meaning that the package highlights that Europe needs to act across all the technology stack, meaning from chips to compute to AI models. Europe needs also to improve the skills of public employee, but also in the private sector. So as you can see, there are a series of actions that Europe is proposing to reach this tech sovereignty. But this tech sovereignty doesn't mean that we want to close the European market. We just want to be able, as Europe, to develop and deploy critical technologies, as for example AI, and of course generative AI, in a way that reduces dependency and will allow both private and public users to have alternatives to AI providers that are outside Europe and have dominant position in the market. As you say, this is indeed important, very important for public administration using generative AI, because as you say, they are indeed exposed institution, meaning also that they manage sensitive data of citizens, and they have a very trust-based relationship with both business and citizens. So we would like for them to use AI models that are secure and that ensure somehow control over data. So as I say, there is no one answer to your question, because the initiative are a lot and are spread across the technology stuff. But if I have to pick like some elements, I would say that we are already doing something to assure that this sovereignty ambition will become reality as much as possible. For me, what is important, the first element will be to try to aggregate the needs of public administration. Of course, public administration are very different, with different needs at local level and national level, but where it's possible, it will be important to, make clear to the market what are the common needs and the common requirements for using AI for public administration. And in this sense, I believe the coordination and support action can help the action that I presented before, because one of the let's say aims of this action is also to pull the demand from public administration for generative AI solutions that are made in Europe, and also create the condition for matchmaking between European startups developing generative AI and public administration. So in this sense, this is one of the many instruments that can help creating this GovTech ecosystem you mentioned. One other important initiative under the tech sovereignty package is also the proposal for the CADA. The CADA will be the Cloud and AI Development Act. And under this act, one aspect treated is also the procurement of AI, of course, and cloud. And the proposal promotes what is called an added value approach to procurement, meaning that public administration, when they are procuring AI and cloud solution, can also add in the evaluation criteria the criteria of having solution that add value and contribute to the EU sovereign ecosystem in Europe. This is a specific article of the proposal. Of course, this is just a proposal, but this is something that can help in having a strategic procurement towards Gen AI providers that are European. And finally, of course, I believe that it's also very important to focus our attention to the startups, because, I mean, if there is demand from public administration is fine, but then the startup should be able, the European startup should be able to satisfy this demand. So there are other initiatives in place in Europe. I am not responsible for this initiative, but you know, we are trying to help startups in different way under the finance for the capital, for the computing power through the AI factory. We really, and this is under the startup and scale up strategy that has several initiatives, but we also have our own initiative like the AI factories for the computing power to provide access for free to startup. And then under the next multi-annual financial program, we will have the European Competitiveness Fund, for example, that will provide startup different kind of financing method, not only grants, but also equity, quasi-equity that are very important for startup. So in a nutshell, and to conclude, I would say that sharing the common needs of public administration will be important, and also create this matchmaking between the demand and the availability of European offer, and then having strategic procurement, but also helping startup to stay in Europe.
Thank you, Ivan. I think it's also great to hear a bit the effort that the Commission is making now, because it's very challenging topic, and of course we need to recognize that we are trying to make an effort, especially colleagues in Brussels, and yeah, it's essential a bit to also create our own European approach to AI. I see the chat is exploding, and I'm very happy for that. It means that our audience is listening and is also very active. So I'll try to pick up a few questions. So I have to apologize for all the people who have posted questions that won't be taken at this moment. But yeah, we had to make some choices. So I just throw the question in the panel, and feel free to decide who wants to take it. So the first question is again, I think we partially taken it already, but there is this shadow chaotic, you call it, Martin, use of Gen AI by individuals. And I think administration try to understand how to govern it a bit. So they try to maybe to penalize or even block the use of this type of systems. Others are more trying with guidelines to support employees to learn how to use this system. Do you have a recipe for that? So how to, because for example, Laura is asking that, but also Colin referring to maybe small administration where maybe you don't have the capacity to create your own internal use using frontier technologies. So maybe to make also internal use convenient for the employees. So how to do that? Because we also listened to some interviewees saying that we try to explain that you shouldn't use Copilot or whatever. You shouldn't upload documents, sensitive documents of the system. Then we observe a bit the traffic on internet, and we realize that so many people are actually doing it in the administration. We actually don't know what they're putting there. So it's not easy, because it's a bit that goes out of control from time to time. But how to do that, and if you see maybe this difference between a small and large organization in terms of capacity of offering an alternative to that. I don't know who wants to take it.
Ilya, were you?
Okay, you said something about it. I think personally, I think it's a competition. That's the way we took it and said, yes, implement good models. If you can't do that, then maybe context is the key. You need to provide some kind of value that you cannot easily get from the open available AIs or offers. Because otherwise you will lose that context. I mean, in the next 1 or 2 years, everyone will get fused to certain AI models by just having supplied so much context in your discussions that the AI model knows you specifically, and then it will answer very good, very nicely. And that is a race that that we are in at the moment. I think that to save that context for the organizational structures, to make it abstract from commercial suppliers. Other than that, of course, yes, you can enforce it in public government, but I think you will have to add some parts of carrots, not only sticks. Otherwise, people will just stick to their iPhones and Androids. Yeah. Well, mostly Androids, actually. iPhone's not doing so good, but yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah, have
Right.
that available.
If I could comment on that as well, I think that's a very, very interesting perspective, Ilya. From an organizational vantage point, I think there's, I understand the focus on value, and I see this in discussion as well. There's a lot of focus on value and of course on productivity, and that's understandable. But at the same time, I think if we agree that this is a long game, and that this is a really long perspective, and it's a huge change, then we need to acknowledge that we're also dealing with a lot of the unknowns here, right? And there's a lot we have to learn and adapt to. And my analysis, at least from my experience, is that this is going to be a huge change in terms of how we do governance, as I was commenting before. And I think we have to look at that, and how do we make this alignment between the individual perspective and the chaos, you could say, there, and the needs, for an organization to have certain expectations and stability and a direction to go. How do we align this? And I think the way I see it, the answer is that you have to distribute some authority here. You have to acknowledge that we're putting this into the hands of workers and employees. Well, we also are giving them some sort of way to do governance and some sort of way to scope this and build their own intuitions on what good looks like and what's the ethical way, what's the sound way to use this technology. So I think we're underselling that point right now. We're not doing enough to help people have a structured conversation about what is this technology and how does it influence us and how does it develop us as professionals, and how do we change and adapt to this, and where do we not want to use this technology? Where's our boundaries to this? And I think the answers come from workers and people, and we need to acknowledge this and facilitate that. And that I think that's the answer: facilitate this, invest in this as a hard investment in reflection, in terms of what practice do we have with this technology, and that's the meat of the matter, and the work we've done with the IT University in Copenhagen is develop a suggestion, at least, to how could you put this into a framework. It's what we call the STARE framework. So it's this reflective practice. But in your report, you certainly also outline ways to go about this.
Thank you. Another question coming from the audience. I mean, more than one question, actually. A lot of people start discussing about maybe some of the risks of the use of GenAI. We probably didn't mention it today as risks, but still we mentioned many things. But for example, we have I'm sure I mispronounced the name, but we have Kovachekva, that is saying that we might have this risk of AI overseeing AI. So we lose somehow the human oversight capacity even over AI. So we start having a bit AI overseeing other AI systems because they just move faster, and this will probably have a lot of influence on the decision-making power or the democratic power, even power of our governments. But you also have Anastasios, but also Mateja, that talk about this techno-deterministic kind of approach. So saying now everyone is using Gen AI, so we need to use Gen AI. So we don't think really where to use it, but we just use it. And this type of approach may lead to kind of a misuse of the system just because we want to use the system independently from where it creates value. So these are just two of the many actually concerns that people also in the room have. So first, I wanted to know if these concerns also resonate with you, or there are also, for example, people having concerns about the costs or the lock-in risk of, I don't know, if tomorrow they raise the costs, what do we do? Or they start giving us maybe less powerful models, or the most powerful models will be more costly. How do we do? So we do have this, well, I'm picking up three risks that I've read from the chat. So the first question is, do they resonate with you? Do you see other type of risks? Are maybe some of these risks not really at stake now? Yeah, what do you think about it?
If maybe I may start with this, because Luca, what I really appreciated about the report you wrote as GRC with the experts is that in the individual perspective, I noticed that a lot of employees that you interviewed are also very aware of the risk and the limitation. That is an interesting data for me because they mention, for example, skill erosion, like risk by over relying on this generative AI chatbot. But I believe, so this is a data that we should take into account, that people that are using generative AI are also very aware of the limitation not only relating to this risk, but also limitation relating to the functionality of generative AI. I noticed that they realized that in reality, when using generative AI, you can use it as a sort of cognitive assistant, but you cannot just, give the task away and make AI complete fully the task, but you always need human validation. And I tend to agree with Martin. If you give like public employees or in general users of this generative AI clear guidelines on how to do it, where are the limitations, and use it in a smart way, in the sense that you always need to recheck the input. It's just the first input. It will help with some of the risks that are highlighted also in the report. I don't know if Martin and Ilya, yeah, they want to
just quickly add something. I mean, I'm definitely someone who is optimistic in terms of AI use, but we see a lot. I tend to stumble into a lot of scenarios where I have to use AI to understand AI, and I'm not sure that this will be fully possible for some time in the future, at some point in the future. Unfortunately, I don't see any other way. I think we are in a situation where we have to make sure that we are AI competent enough to use AI in order to use it for our interests. Otherwise, other people or other parts of the world will do that, and we will not be able to use it for our interests as Europe, as a nation, a group of nations that have common interests, so I'm very much in favor of trying to adopt AI in a good way and make it usable for our purposes in order to use it as an instrument to decrease the risks of AI that other people use. So take an AI for an eye in a way. Take an eye for an eye in a way. Unfortunately, I I've thought about that quite for some time, and I didn't come to any other solution.
A short comment also. I agree very much. I think it's hard to imagine that this is going anywhere else than human. That being the human in the loop or on the loop or whatever. I think it's going to be near impossible in the future. It's hard to imagine anything else. I think you could say that we're actually used to this. We're used to this. There's a lot of technology that isn't transparent for us, at least as general purpose users. So that wouldn't be a first, but then I acknowledge that this is so much more powerful a technology. So I think there's a lot of getting used to here. So what we could do instead of trying to force open the lid, so to speak, and try to make this technology, which is per definition not ever going to be very transparent, I think. So rather we could focus on, sounds a bit, I think we need to focus on what's inside us also, and who we are as humans, and how do we thrive. What do we need to make a more predictable world, to be comfortable, to navigate, to what do we need to do that? And I think we need to, in some sense, take this discussion from looking inward and say, okay, what's important to us? What kind of world do we want to build, and focus on that, and use that as a way to go about AI. But we have to acknowledge that this technology is also, in some sense, going to keep being opaque for us. We are mere humans, I would say.
Thank you. I love your very optimistic and pragmatic also approach to that. I think this is what we need. I'm also a bit sad because we're getting towards the end of our conversation. I would have loved to continue more, and I think also the audience with all the questions they put in the chat, but time is almost over. So I want to ask you a very final sentence or message for the people that we have that are listening us today. So based on your experience, but also maybe today's discussions, what is a single and most important recommendation you would like to give to the audience today that it's full of people that actually are keen to advance the use of AI in public administration? So what's your final statement or recommendation for them? One sentence, really, we ask for a statement to close the event today. I can start with Martin.
Right. So in one sentence, there's this proverb in Danish. I think that the English equivalent would be more haste, less speed. That we need to acknowledge this technology. We need to work with it. We need to implement it. But we need to acknowledge also that it is a very, very long game. So focus on the important stuff.
Thank you, Ivana.
Thank you, Luca. I would say one lesson from this report and this webinar today is use generative AI where it adds public value, not just use it for its own sake, just to say, okay, we are using AI, test with it, see what it works, what does not work, and then try to procure and give it a fair chance to a European solution.
Thank you, Anna. Ilya.
Yeah, I would say try to set up an AI system as an entity that becomes part of your organization, that is context-rich, that knows the goals of your organization, that kind of wants to support it and use its tools that it has at its power to support your purposes, your goals. Go without vision, I think that's best.
Thank you very much. So I thank you all. I think it was a great discussion. I'm sure also the virtual applauses from WebEx are coming from the audience. I'm sure everyone appreciated a lot your time and your insights. And we need to close. So we are getting to the end of the webinar today. So if we can share the slides and you stay with me for 30 seconds more. I have a couple of things still to say to you. So I kindly ask my colleague to share back the slides because, you know, this webinar is part of the Public Sector Tech Watch initiative that is a very important initiative of the Commission on the use of Gen AI and AI in general and emerging technologies in the public sector. And like every year, we are launching the Best Case Award. So we are awarding the best cases on the use of AI, generative AI, emerging technologies in the public sector. So the winners will be awarded by the European Commission, and we'll have the chance to present their solution at the CEMIC 2026 in Dublin. That is a big conference that the European Commission is organizing. But beyond that, all the solution will help other administration to learn from peers, to exchange experiences. That's also what we need in Europe. We need not to work in isolation, but having everyone sharing their own experience with others in a way that we can learn from success stories, we can learn from failures. So I really invite you to take a few minutes to share what you're doing with others, other administration in Europe. This is extremely important for growing up as Europe in the use of generative AI and other technologies. So take a look. I think our colleagues can put the chat to the Best Case Award, the link to the Best Case Award in the chat. And if you go to the next slide, I remind you that this is the first of a series of 3 webinars. So if you enjoyed the discussion today, there will be another very lively discussion next week, same time on Thursday again on service delivery. So we are talking about the technology, now we talk about service delivery, how to make sure that our administration improve the way that they deliver their services to the citizens towards a way that is more proactive, but also a more omni-channel. So it's taking all the channels that we have at our disposal. So I invite you to register. And then we have a third one in September on citizen trust on AI in government. So do our citizens want us to use AI? To what extent? What do they think? We have been collecting thousands of data with a survey in 5 European countries, and we're very happy to present the results. So I invite you to register also to those webinars. And with that, I close thanking again our panelists, thanking again our experts who made the study with us, thanking again our colleague Giulia, Silvia, Lily, and all the colleagues that are helping us in the background to make this webinar today. So thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed the discussions and see you next week. Thank you very much.